Hey guys, welcome back to Release the Craftin. Priscilla here with another episode of Storycraft. And you guys, you can't believe it, I can't believe it, but this is the 5th Wednesday of the month, which means that we're still in the month of May, and this is the last of my viewer requested stories for my viewer request month. So this month I did in a bunch of stories. I did all the stories that I could find that had been requested. I still have a couple left to do, which I will do eventually down the road. But for this month, I wanted to feature your guys' special request, and so I did. Does that mean I will never do another special request? No. So please feel free to leave your comments in the description box below, and let me know what story you want to hear next on this channel, because it is truly my delight and pleasure to do the stories that you guys pick, because I love to know what you guys are interested in. But you know, maybe if, like, down the road I get a bunch more again, I'll do another, like, month of story features. But for right now, I'm going to be moving on to my next topic. I think next month you guys will be excited to see what I have there. Or maybe you won't. I don't know. We'll find out, right? We'll find out together. But this month, we're not talking about next month. Right now, we're talking about a viewer request. Already off to a good start. Words are really hard, guys. We're doing a viewer-requested story by my friend Carly over at the Village Tarot Witch. She has this very timely story request, so I had to squeeze this one in this month, because in this last week of May into the first week of June, my friend Carly and my friend Joy at Witch Mooncraft, who I talked about just recently, you may have seen it on my Queen of the Damned tarot reading, they're doing a Queen of the Damned week. So, Carly, today, even as I am recording this story for you guys today, she released a origin story from the movie and / book, mostly from the book origin story of the Queen of the Damned. And she asked me if I could do a vampire origin story to correspond or correlate with that, and I was like, I absolutely can. I would love to. The only problem with doing a vampire origin story is that there isn't a specific vampire origin story. There's not like a cultural vampire origin story, because vampires actually exist across, like, oceans and worlds of culture. Like, almost every country in the world has some kind of vampire story or vampire adjacent story, so that was a really hard thing to narrow down. Luckily, because they're doing Queen of the Damned, and the origin for that story is in ancient Kemet, which is ancient Egypt, I was like, oh, I'll just do a vampire story from Africa. Like, we'll narrow that field down. And I originally was going to do a vampire story from specifically Egypt to even be, like, more matchy-matchy. But then I realized I kind of low-key did that story when I did the Bast episode, because an early example of vampirism is the story of Sekhmet, and I kind of told you guys about that when I did the episode on Bastet, or Bast, the cat goddess of Egypt. So if you were interested in hearing that story, it is tucked into that episode, which is in the Storycraft playlist. I don't mention that enough. I should probably start linking it to these videos. But there's a whole playlist of Storycrafts that you guys can follow along if you want to listen to a bunch of stories and craft with me. They're there. I'll try to remember to link it. But this story will also be in there. And that story about Sekhmet is inside of that Bastet episode. So I was like, well, shoot, you already did a Sekhmet episode, so, like, what are you going to do? You can't do that again. Like, that's a cop-out. So I decided to look for a different, like, African vampire story, and I found one, you guys, that I think you're really going to like, and maybe be a little bit upset about, because it's a little bit upsetting. Maybe only to me, because I think, this particular thing is a little bit icky. I'm not going to spoil it yet. You'll see in, like, just a minute when I start telling you the actual story. But I find it upsetting. So, what I'm going to tell you guys the story about today is and, like, I'm going to apologize in advance. I listened as hard as I possibly could to pronunciations for this, and I kept finding 2 different pronunciations for everything. And both of those pronunciations, like, you know, were consistent across the board. but never together. So I was like, ah, dang, like, I don't know. I'm going to go with the one that sounds the best and has, like, the most people from Africa saying it. So I feel like maybe I'm okay. But even then, I have a Western mouth, and it's not the best at pronouncing things not from my culture. So apologies in advance. But today, we're going to be talking about the Adze. And that is a tale that comes to us from West Africa, from the Awe people of Ghana, Benin, Togo, and Nigeria. And you guys, this is a doozy. So sit back, get your snacks. We're going to jump into it. We're not even going to the way, way long ago. We're just going to the long ago. And I want you to picture it, because there isn't like a specific myth, like an A to B to C story that I can tell you. But I've got kind of an idea. I'm going to set the scene for you. So picture it. It's a hot night. You're in West Africa. You and your family are getting ready for bed. You're shutting down your house. You're closing your windows, locking your door, tucking your children in good night. You go to bed and immediately fall asleep. It's a very peaceful, lovely evening. And the last thing on your mind are the fields of tall savanna grass with the beautiful little fireflies sparkling through them as they're lighting up a hot summer night. And those are just the things that you're thinking about as you fall asleep. But then your dreams are entirely consumed by these little fireflies, just sort of wafting through the grass. Except for one is brighter than the rest. In fact, it's so bright, it's almost like a little tiny ball of fire. And it is not just like wafting through the grass doing firefly business. No, it is coming straight for you. It's coming straight for you, and it is flying around you, and it is making you feel hot and sweaty because it's a ball of fire, and you are so uncomfortable by its presence that when you wake up in the morning, you are exhausted. It's like you spent your entire night running away from this burning hot little ball of firefly that was tormenting you in your sleep. And you're exhausted. You're a little bit more fatigued than you normally are when you wake up because you did not sleep well. And you get up for the morning. You open up your windows. You look to your spouse and you see that they're laying there. They look peacefully sleeping, but they look a little bit sweaty too, like a little bit more than you would be on a summer night. And you feel their forehead and they're kind of burning up. They're not well. Your spouse is running a fever and you're like, well, that's no good. So already in your mind, you're thinking about what you're going to do. You're going to go get some water. You're going to go get some herbs together, see if you can help him feel better or help them feel better. And then you go check on your kids, and your kids seem to be fine, except for your youngest and most precious child, your personal favorite. You're not telling them that, but your personal favorite. She just seems a little bit paler than normal and a little bit more lethargic. And you ask her, like, honey, did you sleep well? And she says, oh, I'm fine. But she sounds so lackluster and so drained of energy that you're like, oh man, she must have what my spouse has too. So already in your mind, you're running through all the things you got to do today. You tell her to take it easy. You get some food together. You go out to get some water and pick up some herbs. And then, you run into your neighbor who also looks a little bit pale and a little bit peaky, and they're not as energetic as they normally are. And you're thinking, no way, like this guy is the guy who tells us all these wonderful stories from all of his travels. He's so smart. He's so witty. And he's just here like, good morning. Yeah, didn't sleep well. I don't know what it is. I don't really feel that great. Probably going to go back inside. And you're like, man, I think the sickness is sort of spreading because my kids have it. My husband has it. Like, now this guy's got it. What's going on? So you go, you fetch the water, you come back, and then you see that there is a very, very handsome man in the village. You can't ignore this man because he's just so charming and so, spectacular. People look to him for guidance because he's that handsome and charming. And he's there and he looks beat. He had been rode all night, and not in a fun way, but by a nightmare hag. Something has done something to this guy because he looks like he's about 1 foot away from the grave. He is so pale. All the color is drained from his cheeks. And you're just like, oh my gosh, there's something going on here. Something is spreading through the village and I don't know what it is. And, you go back, you try to treat your family as best as you can. You keep taking care of them. And by the end of the week, things don't get better. Your spouse has died. And then your child has died. And another one of your children is presenting ill. And then your neighbor is gone. And that handsome man, that pinnacle of authority in the village, gone. And you don't know what it is, but now the people are starting to whisper. Is it a plague? Is it a disease? Or is it the Adze? So at this point in the story, you might be like, Priscilla, what the heck is happening here? What's the Adze? What's it doing? And let me tell you guys. The Adze is a couple of things. It's a little bit complex. When I started doing this, I was like, I'm going to find this great, like, African vampire story. And as I learned about it, I was like, maybe not so straightforward. Do you want to commit to this? And it turns out I was already a couple pages of notes in, so we committed to the bit, and here we are. The Adze can be described in two ways. The first way is going to be probably the most westernized version of this I can give you guys, which is not the most accurate, but not the most inaccurate either. It gets really complicated, and I'll explain more about that as we go. But the Adze is seen as both a spirit and a vampiric type entity that takes the form of a firefly. And it flies through the cracks, through the windows, underneath door sills. It's a little tiny firefly. It can get in anywhere. And it crawls into your house, and it uses a trunk-like appendage, like an elephant trunk, to suck the blood or the life force from people. And what it leaves behind is disease and a general round of, like, bad luck. And we'll get more into that, too. Sometimes the Adze doesn't just stop, though, at feeding off of its victim's life force or causing them to have bad luck and disease and things like that. It also possesses people. And they call that the Adzetos, or Adzetos. And those are people possessed specifically by the Adze. The Adze flies into their body, usually through, like, their nostrils or an ear, some kind of orifice. It flies into their body, and then they also become Adze because they're possessed by it. So when you are possessed by the Adze, you are only able to identify a person who is possessed by the Adze because you see a little ball of light or flame emerge from their nose or straight out of their head. And when you become possessed, you then have also the same ability to turn into a firefly. In some versions, it is also seen as a beetle or an owl, but the most common is a firefly. And that allows you to travel great distances so that you can go someplace else, feed on your victims, and return home and resume your human shape throughout the day. And what makes this Adze, like, particularly, like, dastardly is that in its insect form, it is impossible to kill. It is literally indestructible. You cannot kill an Adze. So you can get your grandma's chancla out, and you can beat the shit out of that, like, Adze, and it will not die. It's not going anywhere. The mighty chancla has no power here. You can't kill an Adze. But if you manage to catch one, it will transform back into its human form, and in human form, they're just as vulnerable as any other human. So you can dispatch of them thusly. The problem, the little sticky business comes into play, is that when you catch an Adze, it's going to try to bargain with you and offer you all sorts of gifts and things like that. And so then you have to decide, do I want to let it live and get all of the things it's promising, or do I want to kill it and get revenge on everyone it's ever harmed? If you let it live, some people believe the Adze will then become, like, your buddy. It'll be your friend. It'll be loyal to you, dedicated to you. You're safe from the Adze. It's probably even going to keep its promises. But also, now you have a sort of vampiric life force draining entity that you're kind of responsible for because you didn't kill. So, you know, it's a paradox. Wherever your ethical dice land on that roll, like, you have to decide. But that's the Adze as a vampire. And you might be like, Priscilla, what else is there? You came to tell us a vampire story. You told us a vampire story. Like, what is there? And I'm going to tell you. On the other side, and in other versions of this tale of this entity, let's say, the Adze isn't simply like a vampiric type creature. That's, like, not a thing. In some contexts, the Adze is actually seen as a magical force for good. it's like a being of power, like a spirit or an energy of power and creativity, specifically when it's wielded by women. So, like, yes. But also, like, it's just more like a sorceress sort of spiritual energy that can be wielded positively. On the flip side, you can also wield Adze for malevolent purposes. Um, and usually, like, this sort of malevolent force is birthed from magic that's like specifically intended to cause malice and harm, but also is birthed from acts of like envy and greed. So if a person, like a sorcerer, is very, very jealous of somebody, they can create an Adze or call upon the spirit of this Adze to then enact like their intentions because they're so jealous of somebody. Like, that's where that like sort of malicious nature of the Adze comes from, is from somebody wanting something that they can't have, and they're jealous of it, and they're envious of these things. And it comes through, like you heard in my story, in the traits of people, that you know, like traits from people that you would specifically envy. So, in some like of the cultures, in some of the stories, it's believed that Adze would only prey upon children, and specifically very beautiful children. But it's not limited to just like physical beauty. It can also be very smart people. It can be very charming, charismatic type people. It can be like your brother, because your brother has, you know, a better wife than you do. So you are so jealous of that you birth this entity that then preys upon your brother. Or it can be, you know, people being mad that, like, you know, their children are prettier than your children. Or just, like, sort of these, like, petty things that, like, people envy can birth this Adze spirit, right? And this Adze, like, it specifically refers to malevolent sorcery first and foremost. Before we even get to, like, vampire or vampiric type actions, it's malevolent sorcery that causes death. It causes illness. It causes misfortune. It causes physical unease, like that sense of unwellness and, like, anxiety and depression also comes from Adze. It also just wreaks havoc on people's lives, especially when there's envy involved. If you're envious of another person, this like Adze will cause homelessness, theft, a destruction of their reputation. They can lose their job or their standing in the community. It goes after like bad familial and social relations and affects the entire community. So even if like the malice is directed towards one person, the entire community is affected, because that's how African cultures are like built. They're built on that sense of community and well-being. So something that affects one person will have an impact on the entire community. And this like it's crazy to me, because this is entirely birthed from wanting others to suffer because you're envious. And that's like green-eyed monster of envy, like, and jealousy, like one up, because now it's this horrible blood-sucking fucking firefly that like crawls into people's ears and possesses them and then ruins their lives and gives them diseases and things like that. And that's awful. It's so terrifying. I don't like that it's a bug. That was my big like bleh. I don't like that it's a bug. I love fireflies. I think they're great. I don't want one up my fucking nose, like, under any circumstance. So, going back more into, like, the vampiric side of this and, like, where this sort of came about, you can kind of see, like, where this came from when you look at, like, Africa in itself. The people of Africa are very familiar with the concept of, like, insects carrying disease. So you would think, like, the Adze would take the shape of, like, a mosquito, because that's, like, the common culprit, right? It flies around, it drinks blood, it spreads disease. And I think that's, like, where the correlation between the, like, Adze having, like, that little trunk to, like, suck up the blood, even though it's a firefly, I think that's where it comes from. There's a lot of, like, evidence to show that there's a connection between mosquitoes and Adze, but if you think about it being, like, fireflies kind of sort of looking like little balls of fire in the night, and the way that, like, fire spreads, I think you can kind of see, like, how that connects into the Adze as a firefly, because it's also representative of the like little ball of light that people would see coming out of people to know that they were possessed by the Adze. So there's a little ball of light, there's a little ball of light like floating around, one just came out of your friend's nose, that person's clearly possessed by that little ball of light, that little ball of light happens to be a bug. That's how we got here. Also, this is slightly speculative, but I'm seeing it and connecting the dots with my words in my brain. But I think it's safe to say that, like, mosquitoes might be the origin of the myth, but the Adze are a little bit more, like, magical in origin. They're light-based, so hence, therefore, why are there fireflies? Now, you might be wondering, how do I prevent this, like, horrible blood-sucking firefly from, breaking into my house and ruining my life? Let me tell you, it's gonna break into your house anyways. There's no stopping that. It's the size of a firefly. Like, unless you have a hermetic seal on your house, it's getting in. Bugs get in houses. That's what they do. But, in addition to feeding on the life force / and or blood of people, Adze can also be appeased by either coconut water, coconut milk, or palm oil. So you can leave an offering of that out, and that would be a perfect deterrent, because they're going to go for whatever's easiest. So if blood isn't, like, readily available, they're going to go for the coconut oil that you left, by your bedside. So if you want to keep an Adze from feasting from you, try a little coconut oil. They recommend it for everything else. Why not vampires? Okay, so like a couple more points from my notes. And I think I also referenced this in my story. Some people believe that you could see Adze in your dreams, and I didn't find anything specific as to what you would see in the dreams, just that you might have dreams of the Adze before you were attacked. And people would use that as like this must be an Adze because I dreamed about it, and I'm not going to tell them that they didn't, because I can totally see this happening. And another thing I don't know if I mentioned, I don't remember, because I'm now like going over my notes going, did you say that or didn't you say that? But when you catch an Adze and it returns to human form, it's not going to just be like a docile, it's going to be a person who's going to fight they're going to fight you. They're going to fight you, so make sure like you're ready to square up. Because you got to kind of subdue them before they start offering you things. They're not just going to like be like, oh, you caught me by my toe, like I surrender. It's not going to happen. It's going to be a human being. They're going to fight you. So also something to just, be forewarned about if you happen to catch an Adze in your home. So at this point you might be like, okay, Priscilla, so it's either a vampiric firefly or a like sorceress force wielded by people, and the outcome is entirely dictated based on where the magic comes from, whether it is like the genius of creativity spurned on by female like empowerment and energy, or if it's just someone being in their petty boo-boo feelings who need to lash out and hurt others in order to feel like whole. So how did we get from malevolent sorceress entity to vampire? And let me tell you guys, they actually can pinpoint it in the video I watched right to the book where the first time Adze is referred to as a vampire, and that came about in the 1993 Vampire Encyclopedia by Matthew Benson. So he added the Adze to his vampiric encyclopedia and gave them the name vampire. Previously, before then, they were not referred to as vampires by the culture that they came from specifically. So when you look at the Awe people, like, they did not call them vampires or relate them to vampires in that sense. It was a white man who said, this is a vampire, put it in his book, and they've been calling them vampires ever since. And, like, I'm not going to shit on this white man for being like, they're vampires, because obviously he was collecting a bunch of things from around the world, putting them together in an encyclopedia sort of volume, and trying to, like, make this accessible information to Western audiences, and in doing so, sort of falsely labeled this something it's not, because he didn't, like, cross-check his references or ask somebody from Africa, like, hey, is this accurate? He went, that sounds like a vampire to me, popped it in the book, and that's where the name sort of stuck. And, like, yeah, he should have done better. I think we can all agree he should have done better. But I'm not going to shit on him for bringing culture from another world, oh my god, from another country to Western audiences and being like, have you heard of this? Try this. Because it's not a bad thing to share knowledge. We should just be mindful of how we're sharing knowledge and where it came from. Because, like, I definitely am not the source of this information. I didn't get this, like, from my own personal culture. I got this off the internet. So I'm trying to be very mindful as I share this information with you guys, but also like point out that we should be mindful when we're sharing information from cultures that aren't specifically ours, especially cultures that are like this, that have been like colonized and oppressed, and there's not a lot of this information available because a lot of these cultures are mostly oral traditions, and then they're influenced by the cultures that sort of take them over. So when a culture or a country is colonized, a lot of that like colonial dogma starts to influence how their stories are interpreted and presented, which is where you kind of get things that seem like normal everyday stuff turning into like devil worship and witchcraft because a bunch of white people showed up and said, that's witchcraft. And then they went, well, I guess so. And that just sort of became part of the narrative, and that's not exactly the case. So there's a bit of the colonization happening here in the naming of the Adze as a vampire. And you might be like, well, if you do that, Priscilla, why did you tell us this story? It's because I think it's important. But I also think that this is a very fascinating story. I really love this story. I hope that you guys enjoyed learning about the Adze. I really like the idea of sort of walking the line between vampiric, like blood-sucking entity to like just like the bad juju vibes of like someone's shitty feelings lashing out and becoming a powerful malevolent force that like fucks up people's lives. It's a really interesting story, but also like a bit terrifying because some people got like wrongly accused of being an Adze or being like associated with an Adze in society. Like people aren't chill when that kind of stuff happens around them. And so, like, there's just a lot of, like, really interesting things there. And I would recommend, if you're interested in this, to do some of your own research. I will tell you guys that I learned about this first on Wikipedia because I typed that in, African vampires, And then it led me to then go check out Mythological Africans on YouTube. And the Monstrum segment on Storied, which is a PBS channel. And she also worked with Mythological Africans to do the story on the Adze, and that's where I got the majority of my information on this from. A little bit from that article on Wikipedia, but that was where I got this information, so I will list those below so you can check them out if you are interested in learning about this more, or just pursuing a embellished version of the story, because I definitely embellished to tell you guys this story. That's how I tell my stories. But if you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate your faces. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. And like I said, if you have any comments or requests or things that you want to see coming up here, whether it be stories or projects, you can always recommend those in the comments below. I read every single comment, and I will catch you guys all in the next one. Till then, happy crafting. Bye.